We are going to go to our next story. Europe, staying on Europe. Sorry, everyone. But a lot is happening there. Trump is in Europe. He is attending the G7 meeting being hosted by Emmanuel Macron in France. And at the end of the week, the EU, the European Council, will be meeting to finalize their 7-year budget. So a lot on the table right now with Europe, as we know that there has been this kind of manufactured kind of rift growing between Trump and the European leaders. Is that real? Is it just kind of like a facade? But we are very lucky today to be joined by Marc Botenga, who is a member of European Parliament with the Workers' Party of Belgium, who is going to talk about all of that and more. So, Marc, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Well, big week in Europe. G7 again is meeting in France. Trump, of course, has his sights set on regaining the trust and admiration that in many ways he barely lost from the European leaders due to the war in Iran. But notably, Egypt, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates have been extended an invite to this summit and are in attendance. So what is the agenda of European leaders in this G7 summit? And in your opinion, what should it be?
Well, that's a very, very broad question. I think the first thing to point out, unfortunately, that indeed Trump has very little credibility, and his word is not taken, how would I say, at face value anymore, because he can change his opinion in a very, very short time. But there is one thing that it's kind of astonishing to me that European leaders still treat him as kind of this figure. They try to kind of convince, try to court him in a way. He gets this very nice palace-like reception in France. Dinner in very nice rooms, and fireworks. So he's more being courted in a way, I would say, rather than that the Europeans are trying to convince him. It's more of a let's see how nice we can be, and we're all on the same side kind of thing. So this submissiveness of on behalf of European leaders really is astonishing, and in my opinion not great. Doesn't give a great image of Europe either. Now, definitely, what we need to point out is this meeting brings together, first of all, losers. It's a losing team. The G7 is a losing team. If you look at GDP, the share of growth in the world, the G7 have been losing out over the last years, and arguably more. So you have a group of powers, a club of powers that tries to preserve a world order that they see slipping away from them, right? The center of the world economy is moving towards Asia. You see other powers in South America, in Africa rising. And so the idea of the Europeans is very much, on the one hand, to keep the United States committed to supporting Ukraine, for them to continue in one way or another supporting Ukraine in the war against Russia. And secondly, and this is why they're inviting a number of other countries. I mean, it's not just the ones that you have mentioned. You can also see that at some point Brazil has been invited. There's South Africa has been disinvited. On the other hand, China didn't want to come, but you'll have India, you'll have Kenya coming, and so the idea is kind of to see, can we form kind of a Western bloc in a way. Also to unite it, then potentially against Russia, against China, but at least to have a very strong Western bloc. That's very, very concerning, because you were asking what the agenda should be, and I would like an agenda that would be much more open. That would also be self-critical. Okay, why does one of the rising powers, or maybe the rising power, China is not coming? Why is that? Shouldn't we look more at multilateralism? What have we been doing wrong? Why, for example, is this world order? Why do we absolutely want to salvage it? So in this sense, I think the idea is very much the one of a conservative number of countries that are wondering now, how do we need to innovate to keep control of part of the world?
I mean, sorry, I didn't mean to laugh out loud, but that was hysterical. The team of losers. I'm laughing again. Wow. G7, team of losers. But no, you make a very good point. We wanted to ask you also, Marc, about the fact that, we've got this Iran deal, the Iran-U.S. Memorandum of Understanding agreement that's supposed to be signed on Friday. It's a huge breakthrough after 3 months of just like grueling war. And some think that Trump may also want to try to push for peace in Eastern Europe. So the question is, why are European leaders so against reaching a negotiated settlement in Ukraine? And why are they so determined to sanction Russia, but then refuse to take any action against Israel, which by all measures is, winning in barbarism and brutality?
Well, yeah, that's obviously the double standards we have seen very clearly over, well, arguably longer period of time, but especially over the last 2.5 years, where indeed Russia has, since 2022, really had over 20 sanction packages from the European Union, while Israel, on the other hand, has seen none. So that is extremely impressive. And basically, we see similarities because we see violations of international law, we see war crimes. We see, a lot of similarities in the crimes, but looking at it from the European establishment, things look very differently. They see, on the one hand, on let's say the Russian-Ukraine thing, Russia is an obstacle today to also the expansion of let's say the Western, be it NATO expansion, be it the expansion of the European Union, because obviously Russia wants its own sphere of influence. Russia is fighting not just in Ukraine but also in other countries, to maintain its own sphere of influence. Very, very clear about that. And in this sense, the weakening Russia is because it's very often very interesting when you listen to the speeches in the European Parliament, for example. It's very much as much about weakening Russia as it is about supporting Ukraine. While these two are not necessarily, how would I say, connected. I mean, there's obviously a connection on the battlefield, but that's one thing. Secondly, indeed, it would be a point that after this many years of war and destruction, it would be time for diplomacy. And you have seen some European leaders, either privately or very cautiously, admitting to this, saying, that there's probably no military solution to this, the death and destruction should stop, but without actually, taking a strong diplomatic lead. That diplomatic lead has been taken at some point by the United States, but also by China, by the African countries, by the Vatican, and so on. So there's some strategic thought behind it, also internally, domestically, because obviously the war with Russia gives a very strong argument for militarization domestically. We have seen certain politicians make the point, but workers should not ask for too many wage increases, or yes, they need to work longer shifts because there's a war with Russia. So it's also used as an argument for domestic, let's say, social destruction, right? Not a detail. And it's used as an argument for domestic militarization also in the shift in production. We need to produce more weapons. We need to invest more in the arms industry because Russia. There's a big contradiction on this because the establishment discourse on the one hand says, we can beat Russia. Russia's almost beaten in Ukraine. And at the same time, Russia's ready to invade Europe. Now, both cannot be true at the same time. They cannot and lose Ukraine and conquer Europe. So you can see that there's obviously a fog of war or propaganda narrative ongoing. Now, Israel is a very different case for the European establishment. Israel is embedded in the European system. Everything Israel does is in one way or another supported by be the United States, be the European countries. This is very important. Israel plays the role of a little bit of how did the German chancellor said, they're doing the dirty work in the Middle East by attacking Iran, by attacking Lebanon, and so on and so on, occupying part of Syria, doing the ethnic cleansing and the genocide in Palestine. This was called at some point by the German chancellor doing Europe's or the West's dirty work. So basically, Israel being embedded in the Western system makes it, that we look the other way when they commit crimes, and we continue to send them weapons, we continue to fund them, we continue to be completely complicit in all of these crimes. And this is the message we're sending. Like, we will, criticize and condemn, sanction crimes by others, but we demand the right to commit crimes ourselves. So that is obviously pushing us towards a world order that's extremely dangerous, where the UN Charter, international law have no more value. And you can see that shift also rhetorically. The European Union now very often speaks about a rules-based order. It doesn't speak about an order ruled by the UN Charter or international law. A rules-based order is a very different concept, because who sets the rules? Who sets the rules? Is it the international law? Is it the UN Charter? Or is it the rules that the West or the Europeans want to impose on the rest of the world, which is a very, arbitrary system of rules?
Well, yeah, I think, and you've done a great job of this, speaking out on the floor of European Parliament to all these kind of war maniacs who seem very content on continuing to support the genocidal state. But back in Brussels at the end of this week, a little closer to where you are, the European Council is going to meet to discuss the bloc's new 7-year budget. And it seems to largely be dominated by military spending. And this is guised as, quote, defense, security, space. But again, really, it's about military spending. So talk to us about the stakes of this meeting, and why is it that European leaders are so intent on military spending right now?
Well, let's first look at one of the absurdities of this entire debate. We've been debating how much percent of our GDP should go into military affairs, into war, into defense, whatever you want to call it. And then it was 5% because NATO and Trump pushed for that. And some are now speaking about 3.5%. But this is a very weird way of looking at expenditure. In no other sector would you do this. Like, you would look, I don't know, education, right? You would look at, okay, how many schools do we need? How many teachers do we need? How many hospitals do we need? How many nurses? How many doctors? And then you would just adjust spending accordingly. What we see in defense is like, okay, we need to spend at least this much of all wealth produced in our country to military matters, meaning that if you produce more, you also need to spend more on defense. That is not a way of looking at defense or territorial defense. So it's about much more than this. What is it about? It is that what I was saying before, about the club of losers. This is economically true, and the Europeans feel this as well. This was also true on innovation, on many topics. Europe's been weakening because of its completely nonsensical economic policies, of austerity, of not having a public industrial policy, and so on. And so one of the ways to stay what they euphemistically call a global player is to militarize. And hence we see that in this massive defense expenditure drive, there's also a lot of how would I say, much of an offensive attacking posture. So you will be seeing, for example, that France or Belgium are going to be buying or producing blinded vehicles designed mostly for Western Africa. Now, we are not defending ourselves in Western Africa. When Trump was attacking Iran, he said, no, we're going to defend our troops there. But, you're literally on the other side of the world attacking. That's not defensive. When you see the talk in France about a new aircraft carrier, long-range missiles discussion also in other countries, these are not weapons that are designed mainly or even at all for defensive purposes. These are to project power and to be able to intervene on the other side of the world, be it even in the Indo-Pacific, right? So this is one story. A second story is obviously that those that want to be very close to the United States, they say, no, but we need to take over the military control of Europe. Not necessarily in a defensive perspective again, in a very, how would I call it, expansionist view as well, saying, we want to control our neighborhood, be it the southern neighborhood, being the northern neighborhood. So all of this pushes then towards this militarization. There's going to be a lot of debate on how much Europe should do, how much member states should do. We see that today the militarization drive in Europe is strongest, arguably, in Germany, which has most money left, which can borrow or lend as much money as it wants, basically. And so this also creates more inequality inside Europe. Germany will not only have the strongest economy, it will also have the strongest army. Uh-oh. Very troublesome, very worrisome if you look at history.
For some reason, I feel very... Yeah, for some reason that makes me uncomfortable. A strong German army. I don't know why, but there's just... My gut tells me that's not a good thing.
No. Unfortunately, I heard the German chancellor at some point saying, "I want the strongest army in Europe," and I was like, "That's a very, very weird metric to have." You could have a metric to say, "I want to be able to defend myself. I want to be able to guarantee peace and security." I don't know what. I mean, you could have different metrics,
I
but
wish,
saying
I wish people wanted to invest in like building, in like housing everybody and giving everyone healthcare and like curing
absolutely.
cancer as much as they want to have the biggest defense budget in like all of the land.
We're sending these letters, like many ministries of defense what's it called now in the U.S. secretaries of war are sending letters to young people to say, don't you want to enlist and join the army or whatever? Why don't we do that for other things? Why don't we do that for doctors or whatever you need in your society
Teachers,
and teachers, also on industry,
nursing
by the way. Why don't
deficit.
if we want to create jobs like the defense industry, the arms industry, it yields a lot less jobs, almost none compared to other sectors. Like, so if it's about job creation, quality job creation, that is not the first sector you would go and look to. It's also not a very productive sector because once you got, like, I don't know, you've got your 1,000 tanks, what are you going to do with it? You're not going to use
Yeah.
them to go to the supermarket or to go to drive to school. So they're standing there unless you go to war. So you create a structural incentive to have a war economy to keep your production going.
And again, the last time that Germany had a war economy, things turned out pretty bad for a lot of people. I wanted to ask you, Marc, about one last thing here as we wrap up, and that is the supposed divide between, big bad Trump and the kind, soft, diplomatic Europeans. Because, commentators often speculate about that growing divide. And it's, they blame it on Trump's rash measures, his anti-immigrant crackdown, his really just like reckless tariffs, the new wars, for example, the one he just launched against Iran that screwed the world economy. Can you, I don't know, sometimes that divide seems like more of a show because we talked about earlier how European leaders still end up lining up for the most part behind the U.S., whether it's Biden or Trump in charge. So what really is the state of U.S. relations? And is it any part of it actually in danger because of big, bad, crazy, mentally ill, demented Trump?
I will not laugh out loud, Rania, but this description was very evocative and creative.
You're welcome.
Listen, no, listen. There's indeed this speculation. To be honest, the EU has caved a lot. We've had this discussion on Greenland, and I was very much, oh no, Trump will never take Greenland. In the end, we started negotiating and asking him, how many bases do you want, right? So, and then now we just approved the trade deal, which is a very bad trade deal for the EU. It's like it puts like 15% tariffs on many EU goods, but gives tariff-free access to EU markets for US goods. So that's completely imbalanced. And moreover, we then committed to buying, I don't know how many hundreds of billions of energy and arms in the US. So it's very imbalanced. I would say we've got this structural, how would I say, submissiveness towards the United States, economically, but also politically, ideologically, which is an issue. There is now an increasing conscience, I would say, on behalf of certain European leaders, certain European countries, that we need more independence, autonomy. But what we are warning for is that we should not try to copy paste the US model. That European countries in the past, that European autonomy is not necessarily a good thing if it serves to do the same thing the United States are doing throughout the world. If it is to go back to a European colonialism, a European imperialism, most European countries, many European countries have been colonial powers, have continued these neo-colonial imperialist policies also on their own. They didn't need the US for that. So if the idea is to construct an autonomous, independent, or more autonomous, more independent Europe, to then copy-paste the United States, cutting back on all public services, on social rights, and so on, in order to go and dominate, I don't know, the Middle East, Africa, whatever, that's not the kind of Europe we want. So we need to, on the one hand, of course, say we need more autonomy from the United States, on the other hand, say we want a fundamentally different Europe. Right, we don't want to copy a Europe made in USA, to put it this way, right? And in that sense, there is a growing consciousness, a growing awareness, I would say, of the problem of dependency vis-a-vis Washington. But very often, the ruling classes are then manipulating that to say, but hey, Europe should be able to play that global part, right? Well, we are saying, no, listen, we have a fundamentally different model in mind. We don't need a Europe that's going to go to war wherever there's a crisis or wherever they think they should go to war. We need a Europe that talks to people, other countries in a respectful way, that does diplomacy, and that at the same time guarantees, social rights and fundamental freedoms inside Europe. But that's obviously going to be a big battle. We're going to be waging and continue to wage over the next, I'd say, weeks, but it might be slightly longer than that.
Well, Marc Botenga, thank you so much for joining us here at BT Live. We will be hearing from you again soon, surely, because it is going to be a hot summer for sure.
Thank you very much for having me. Have a very good day.